Hi all, my name is Daniel. I'm working as a data engineer at Bosch in Stuttgart in Germany. And yeah, first of all, thanks for joining our presentation. First up will be Jens.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jens Scheffler. I'm also working with Bosch, and Daniel is my peer and working every day in the office usually. And yeah, want to present the EdgeExecutor. So I'm committed to Apache Airflow and Apache PMC besides working at Bosch. And we use Airflow to orchestrate a big workload cluster in a distributed environment. And that distributed environment was the main driver for inventing and contributing the EdgeExecutor. There was a cliffhanger why it is called Edge 3, and I will reveal it in a moment. But coming a bit to the history, so our main core problem is that we have a distributed data center set up, and we need to orchestrate physical hardware, which is not sitting in the cloud, but our Airflow instance is in the cloud. And initially, we tried to compensate this with different means, and we saw that remote work execution was a driver for instability. And so, there was an initial discussion being kicked off as an Airflow improvement proposal, number 69. Initially, it was called Remote Executor. And actually, I submitted this to be speaking openly to have a call for papers for the last year's summit and wanted to have then a talk about what would be the solution space to make it. And it got really traction in the community and was a larger discussion. And last year's summit, there was a lightning talk where I presented it. There were PRs open. It was not sitting on main. Since last year's Airflow summit, it went into the main and was temporarily accepted. And it was really surprising how much support was given by the Airflow community and how many people are at least showing interest of this. So it was agreed with the Airflow other contributors that the EdgeExecutor will be a critical feature of Airflow 3, and we temporarily, as a preview feature, made it also working in Airflow 2, but it's rather an experimental state. And that would be the opening question to the round, who is already using EdgeExecutor from here in the room? 3, okay. Somebody planning to use it? Okay, a couple more. Let's see if I scare you afterwards or if you then start deploying it. So I'm really surprised how much echo it had, and the initial idea was that it is a common feature and hopefully can be leveraged to other environments, not specifically to our Bosch problem. So as I had it initially introduced in the keynote, a bit more details now in this talk and getting a bit more also retrospective results that we have it as we are operating it really since 12 months in our production. As soon as it was hitting main, we compiled the wheel packages and deployed it to production. And we are really happy since 12 months that we are running it productively and running millions of tasks already through this EdgeExecutor. And we are seeing it really stable. So usually you have your central Airflow instance and you access it. And if you have some other data centers which are outbound, at least our problem is that from our corporate network, we only have proxy and HTTPS support. We try to compensate this a bit by tunneling via HTTPS. We tried VPN solutions, bringing our workload on our corporate sites, running on a Celery executor into the central site. But whenever the VPN went down or we had proxy interruptions, the connections broke down, and this was really scary operational problems. The Celery workers always got disconnected, tasks were stuck, we needed to restart the Celery workers. We couldn't see on the central side what the status is if the workers are still alive or broken, and it was really an operational nightmare. And so the Edge worker bridges this with the requirement that it only needs some kind of HTTP connection, which usually you have. And the important thing is it's only an outbound HTTPS connection from the perspective of your corporate network. Because sometimes you can also say make a direct connection in the other way around, but then you need to open firewall ports that somebody strange guy from the internet need to connect to your enterprise, which is usually prohibited by security rules. And this is not only on one side, but the problem repeats on the more deployments you have and how many data centers you deploy maybe around the globe. So just to compare to other options of remote execution, to make it clear that the Edge executor is not a solution for all and everything. It was specifically made for all the deployments where you know you have a distributed setup. And the alternatives are clearly to be highlighted, which might be easier to operate. If you only fall into this category and that is sufficient for you, then go with it. It's not meant to be the one size fits all. So if you are able to get an outbound connection from your cloud into whatever your remote location, and that's running stable enough, then one option is the SSH operator. If the SSH port is free, you can call something remote and just do a remote call. And kind of most people can live with that if security rules allow to. Another solution space, also classic, is using either Kubernetes executor or Kubernetes pod operator. As the Kubernetes API only needs HTTPS itself, it could also direct to a remote location, and that's a typical workaround in the past. Open your Kubernetes API, get a remote call in, but it is from your corporate side an inbound HTTP. So still, yeah, it's multi-factor usually with Kubernetes, with the certificate being presented, but still it's a security discussion. Yeah, we try to connect our worker with VPN. That is also an option. And I believe since a year ago, also the Celery package stability has improved. So it might have been better since a couple of months since Celery 5.5 is out. But we saw that if VPN is breaking down, then also you have a shaky worker connection, especially maybe tasks are interrupted. And yeah, kind of sometimes it's hard to recover and you have a lot of retries in those infrastructure flakiness problems. And to say importantly, in the Edge executor case, if the connection is breaking down, the Edge executor, the worker that is running remote, will do retries for per default configured 5 minutes. So if your connection is temporarily down, it will retry to reconnect and the task will continue working even if the connection is shortly interrupted, which is really a stability factor. Yeah, similar like VPN, you can also make an HTTP tunnel. There are tools. But HTTP tunnel via proxy is even more unstable than kind of whatever we have seen before. So yeah, you can do it, but run it on your own risk. And yeah, the classic default, which we also considered, but we didn't want to have, is just making multiple Airflow deployments. One Airflow deployment on-prem and one in the cloud. And then still you probably want to have an end-to-end orchestration and you need to bridge then the gap. Maybe via Kafka queues or some other event mechanisms that you trigger something on-prem, and then once the on-prem stuff is through, trigger it back. But that also splits up the visibility. If you want to have an end-to-end solution, you need to split up your OTX and your workflows according to your infra. Technically possible, but you need to maintain multiple versions and you need to check where the data is going. So, but this is still valid and will be still valid also in the future. So this is kind of was existing in Airflow 2. Our requirements were, when we said for going for Edge, we also called it the very remote execution, not only remote execution, is we wanted to have a target situation that it is a lean setup. You don't need to carry all the dependencies from your cloud setup, but a very lean worker deployment only in Airflow 3 consisting out of the task SDK, the worker, and the providers you need for the operators. Yeah, we wanted to have, and we achieved it, that we have a robust network connectivity only using HTTPS. So you don't need to open any other network ports, and that's the only thing needed to deploy. And we wanted to have it seamlessly integrated so that the Edge executor is a first-class citizen. Main enablement was in the Airflow 2 line. There was also a carve-out of all the executors. In early versions of Airflow 2, the executor was really bundled into the core. But now you can plug in different executors, so you can also roll your own if you want to do this. So that was the base enablement. Technically speaking, the kind of technical architecture behind the scene is that image is coming from the AAP specs. If you want to read it in detail, The critical components that had been contributed is the scheduler. So as the scheduler is modular and can accept other executions, executor types, there's this Kubernetes executor, Celery executor, local executor. That kind of plugin package with Edge3 will add the EdgeExecutor. And also recommended if you have a hybrid setup, at least we are using this, kind of you can configure multiple executors to say everything that runs in your central infrastructure can still continue running Celery, and everything that runs remote you put on the edge, or however you like it. So you can flexibly configure the executors to be multiple things. The data storage for the executor is the metadata database. If the Edge3 provider package is installed, it will create 3 tables for you. One for the workers, where the workers are listed. One is for the jobs that should go to the remote workers. And the third table, which is a temporary storage for logs, as kind of the workers are submitting logs, also via HTTPS. And kind of while the job is running, you see the logs progressing in the UI. Somehow they need to be temporarily stored. So that's why 3 tables are in the database of that. And on the API server, or if you run it on Airflow 2 on the web server, there's a UI extension being made that exposes additional REST API endpoints. And those REST API endpoints serve as the endpoints for the remote worker. And that contains the services for requesting a new job and registering the worker and kind of holding the communication between the worker and the backend. Need to know that this plugin in the UI is not enabled per default. So if you install that provider package, you need to turn it on. Reason is secure by default. So if you want to use it, you need to turn it on. It's not that you deploy that package by accident and you open the door. Also, you need to create a security key into your Airflow configuration that is then used by the remote workers to authenticate. And so on the remote side, you have the Edge worker, and that is the red package on the right side. You install the provider package, which brings the Edge worker, and you can call it with Airflow Edge worker, -- help, gives you more options. And that will then run the workload, and that needs the DAGs, of course, to parse them and execute them, but the remote package is quite lean from the set of dependencies. And so with this setup, everything should be working. There are also documentations kind of how to deploy, of course. And it's now out to be used. So Edge3. So the provider package is called Edge3 and not Edge. So it's Apache Airflow providers Edge3. Who believes it's because it's for Airflow version 3? 2 only, yeah, it's not right. So Edge3, the name came from, initially the proposed name was to call it remote. And then there was a debate in the community that remote is not correct because Celery also is a bit of remote. And if you have Kubernetes executor, that's also remote. So the term remote was not on the plate, and we aligned on naming an edge for all the edge cases. And then we tried to register the name Edge, Apache Airflow providers Edge at PyPy, and PyPy rejected the package registration because PyPy has an intrusion and spoofing detection and thought that the name is too similar to other packages. So we couldn't take it, and then we tried another name, which also failed, and then we thought, okay, let's do a third attempt. And so that went through, and PyPy didn't block us. So thanks to the intrusion detection of PyPy, we maybe in the future rename it back without the 3, because meanwhile we claimed the name to PyPy and they made an exception for us. But let's see if we technically migrate. Okay, and handing over to Daniel for the details.
Thank you. So we just had a look at our motivation to create the EdgeExecutor and also at some of the internals of it. What we will have a look at now is how you can get started using the EdgeExecutor. So at first we will look at a deployment example. In this example, we will anticipate that you already have an Airflow deployment running somewhere. That's what you can see on the left side. This could be running, for example, on the public cloud. And Then you have a remote location, which is somewhere else, and there you want to deploy the Airflow Edge Executor. And now we will check how you can do this. So the first step is that in your Airflow main deployment, you will install the Edge-free provider package. This is required so that you can enable the API endpoint that the Edge executor needs to connect to your main Airflow deployment. After installing this Edge-free provider package, the next step is that you adapt the configuration of your Airflow deployment. There's two things that you need to do. First thing is you need to enable the Edge Executor API endpoint, because per default it's disabled for security reasons. And then you also need to define a secret key. The secret key will be distributed later on to the remote location, and that will be used to authenticate the Edge Executor to your Airflow main deployment. After doing these configuration steps, you're done on your Airflow main deployment. Then the next steps will happen on the remote location. On the remote location, you will also need to install the Airflow core package, and of course also the Edge-free provider package. Our recommendation would be to do this inside a Docker container, because it has several advantages. At first, it will isolate your Airflow Python environment from the host Python environment, and it will also make the next steps a bit easier. What's required as the next step is you need to somehow provide the Edge executor access to your DAG files. There are different ways how you can do this. If you're already running Airflow on Kubernetes, for example, you're probably familiar with git sync. And the good news is, even though you will not run the Edge executor on Kubernetes on the remote location, you can still use git sync. The way how you can do this is you can just pack your Airflow Edge Worker Docker container and the git sync Docker container into one Docker Compose deployment. And then you can have a shared Docker volume that git sync will use to synchronize the DAG files, and the Edge Worker Docker container can just mount this Docker volume. Like this, you basically have the same experience in your remote location that you also know from Kubernetes. So then it works quite seamlessly. There's one more detail to mention here. If you're coming from the Kubernetes world, you're probably familiar with liveness probes and health checks. The good thing is with Docker Compose, you also have health checks in there, but there is one important difference. If a health check fails in Docker Compose, Docker will not automatically restart your Docker container. It will just mark them as unhealthy, but they will keep running. But obviously you want to have automatic restarts, and to get this, you also need to include the so-called Docker auto-heal container into your Compose deployment. And after you have done all this, then your Edge worker can already connect to your Airflow main deployment and allows you to run jobs that you start in your Airflow main deployment in the remote location. You can see here that at the moment you have to assemble this Docker Compose deployment by yourself, but we're also planning to make an open source contribution for this Compose file so that you don't have to do this on your own. But that's something that's up to come in the future. All right. And then after you have deployed your Edge executor, you will see two new panels in the Airflow web UI. You can see that one of them is an overview of the Edge workers, and the second one are the Edge worker jobs. Now we will look first at the overview of the Edge workers. You can see like some different rows here. Each row is one Edge worker that's connected to your Airflow instance. And in the columns, you can see like different status properties. You can see, for example, if the worker is currently connected, if it's currently running some jobs, if it's currently in maintenance mode, or if it's offline. One interesting thing that we will have a look at now are the queues. the queues are not a new feature that we introduce with the edge worker, but with the edge worker, it becomes especially useful because when you're working with the edge worker, you can think of the queues as kind of the capabilities of an edge worker. You could have, for example, different groups of edge workers that have different characteristics. You could have some edge workers which have, for example, special hardware connected to them. Or you could have other edge workers which have like a lot of memory. Like what you want to do with them, it always depends on your use case. But by assigning them specific queues, you can control in your DAG which group of edge workers should execute which task. And that's really useful. We will also look at different use cases for the edge worker later, and then it will maybe become more obvious why this is so useful. In the other columns, you can also see like the last heartbeats of the edge workers. You can see some system information. And also another feature that's a bit special to the edge worker is the operations section, because this allows you to manage your edge workers directly from the web UI. There's a few things you can do here. For example, you can click this shutdown button. This will tell the edge worker to complete the jobs that it's currently running and afterwards shut down. And one special feature of the edge worker is the so-called maintenance mode. The maintenance mode is something that you can start, and then you can leave a note there while you were putting it into maintenance mode. And then it will also just drain the edge worker. It will continue running the jobs that it's currently running, but not take up any new jobs. And then afterwards, it will just wait until you manually stop the maintenance mode. That's useful when you have the use case that you want, for example, to connect special hardware to your edge workers. That's what we are doing in our use case, which I will describe a bit more in detail in the upcoming slides. But just know that there is a maintenance mode, and it allows you to temporarily drain certain edge workers. And the last buttons to mention here are those two here. There you can add and remove queues directly from the web UI. Yeah, so that's a bit of a special feature of the edge worker, that you can do some management tasks directly from the web UI. And this would also allow people to manage it who are not, who don't have direct access to your Kubernetes cluster or to command line access or whatever. Yeah, then the second panel are the edge worker jobs. There you can basically just see an overview of all the jobs that are currently running on the edge workers. Yeah, there's not too much to explain here. Then one more thing that we want to talk about briefly. As soon as you're running the edge worker in production, you probably also want to look into monitoring. I mean, we saw already that on the web UI directly, you can see some status information, but running this in production, you probably also want to collect some metrics. And the good news is the EdgeExecutor automatically exposes some metrics to stats_d. For example, you can see the connection status, you can see the maintenance status, and you can also see how many jobs are currently running on each edge worker. This can be used then to monitor the uptime of the edge workers, for example, or also to collect statistics of the utilization. How we use it, for example, I mean, we have set up our Airflow instance to, we included Prometheus to collect all the metrics, and then we have Grafana as to create some dashboards and to create some alerts. And here you can see one dashboard that we created. That's basically a timeline where each row is one remote worker that we have connected to this Airflow instance. You can see in the gray bars when edge worker is connected, but currently not running any jobs. In the blue bars, you can see when it's connected and it is running some jobs. And in the purple bar, you can see when it's currently offline for some reason. I mean, this gives you a pretty good overview, like how utilize your edge workers, or you can see if you need more of them or if most of them are just idle all the time. Yeah, but it's just one example. What you want to do with it is really up to you. You can also set up some alerts if one of them goes down. Yeah, there are many different interesting insights you can get from this data. All right, so now we talked about what the edge worker is, and we talked about how you can use the edge worker. What's left now is to talk about when you should actually use the edge executor. And to answer this question, let's briefly have a look again at the features of the edge executor. I mean, the thing that it makes it really stand out is probably that it only requires an outbound HTTPS connection. This makes it really versatile, and this is also the reason for the promise, run your tasks anywhere. Because it's just an HTTPS connection, you don't need to allow any inbound connections to your remote location. And HTTPS can also handle unstable network connections quite robustly. Then the next feature, of course, is that it can be managed from the Airflow web UI. So if you have the use case that some other people than your Airflow administrators maybe need to put some workers into maintenance mode sometime, then Edge Worker might be quite useful for you because it has this unique maintenance mode feature. Then, of course, it's seamlessly integrated into Airflow. Since Airflow 3, it's a standard feature. And also the UI panels that you just saw, they're also included per default since Airflow 3.1. And it basically behaves like any other executor in Airflow. You can just define it in your deck that a task should run on the Edge executor, and then it will work directly like any other executor you already know. And yeah, it also has a lean setup. For example, if you want to install it on Windows machines, it might also work out because the Edge Worker package does not have too many dependencies. All right, and then let's talk about what are good use cases for the Edge executor. One use case could be, for example, cost savings. This is, for example, interesting if you're running Airflow in the public cloud. In the public cloud, you have many different virtual machines that you can choose from, some with more memory, less memory, with GPUs, without GPUs. But maybe you already have a lot of servers running in your local data center. And with Edge Executor, you could, for example, decide to run this, for example, jobs which need a GPU, not in the public cloud, but instead on your local data center. And this could, for example, allow you some cost savings. You can always run your workload where it runs most cost efficiently. Or, for example, if you have a large amount of data stored somewhere else than where your Airflow instance is running, then you don't need to transfer your data to the Airflow instance, but you can just bring the execution to the data. This can be really interesting in some big data use cases. Another use cases might be legal requirements. Sometimes you maybe have the requirement that some data is not allowed to leave a certain country or a certain data center. And Edge Executor also makes such use cases possible because there you can, again, bring the execution to the data instead of making the data leave the location where it's stored. And yeah, then another obvious use case, that's the one that we have. Maybe you have special hardware requirements. Maybe you need some special hardware that's not available in the public cloud where you run your Airflow deployment. I will talk about this in 2 slides. You can basically then just set up some Edge executors, connect your special hardware to those, and then you can just orchestrate your jobs from your main Airflow instance on the Edge executors which have the special hardware. And of course, you can also just run executor for the fun of it. There is the story of my colleague Jens, who was already running the Edge executor inside an airplane on the onboard Wi-Fi. So I guess the proof has been made that it can handle unstable network connections. So, yeah.
And it's a challenge because it was in 30,000 feet altitude. So if somebody brings Edge Worker to the International Space Station or to a mini satellite, that might be beating it up, looking forward for the longest distance, somebody can tell.
All right. Then let's talk briefly about our use case of the Edge worker at Bosch. So we are working in a project called the Automated Driving Alliance. That's a cooperation between Bosch and Carriot. And there you can see like two of the beautiful testing vehicles that we have driving around. So if you come to Stuttgart, you maybe see them driving around sometimes. So we don't deploy the Edge worker directly on these vehicles, but we have the hardware which is inside these vehicles in a local data center. And the EdgeExecutor is there so that we can run software tests in our own data center where we have the special hardware. So basically, it's part of our testing chain for the development of the software for automated driving. Yeah, we are using the Edge worker already there since the very beginning. I mean, that's the reason why we started developing it. It's more than 12 months that we're using it. And at the moment, we have more than 90 Edge workers connected to a single Airflow instance. And so far, we're quite happy with the stability, and we're also continuously trying to improve it. And we would also look forward to your contributions. And yeah, that's how we come to the outlook. And that's with Jens again.
Yeah, and kind of a lot of work has also been invested in the last 12 months. And yeah, we see some contributions coming in. That's really cool that we are not the only ones creating and using that. So of course there might be UI beautifications missing. If kind of we saw it here in the example, we had 3 or 4 workers here in display, but if we have the 90, it's really a long list, and kind of like in other views on the UI, filtering is maybe something that is needed, and also better navigation, finding your jobs, finding your challenges, maybe multi-selecting. So kind of a lot of UI things can be optimized, that if you want to take 10 nodes into maintenance, might be better having a batch operation than clicking 10 times. So UI can be beautified, and forgot to say everything is also API open, and kind of you don't need to click, you can also automate it. And also we didn't tell the story, but we have it kind of, we have also a DAG automating the maintenance. So we check if there are continued errors on the remote machines, and then we take them off the production, and we have a reconciliation and retest. So if something seems to be obviously broken, we take them off so that they're not producing errors. We are testing them, and then either we automatically put them into maintenance, or we re-enable them to production, or fix with automation. Yeah, so what we also want to improve in the future is automation of the deployment, as kind of at the moment the bare code is there and you can pip install it, so you're not depending on, but we have learned that Docker Compose is very good, and kind of this deployment automation, deployment options and scripts is something that we also want to upstream contribute so that it makes life easier. Yeah, then we presented the details. Kind of at the moment, there's a shared security key that is distributed to all workers. And yeah, you need to trust your endpoint where it's deployed, because with that security key, you open the door to parts of the API. So I wouldn't say it's a security risk, but having a shared key maybe on multiple locations is maybe not really long-term suitable. So also looking forward that we have individual keys per worker, and maybe also having a security rotation that the keys are expiring at some point of time. So if somebody wants to contribute this, then we're looking forward for this as well. Yeah, kind of as we run many workers already, we know kind of it scales already into the range of at least 100 workers, and every worker can have a certain concurrency, maybe not too much. We are also at the moment improving the amount of jobs each worker can pull. But the target is also that we have dedicated load tests that we can prove the scalability, how many workers and how many jobs can be distributed. At the moment, we're also scaling. We have a standard setup, and we just scaled a bit of more of the API resources. And of course, all the edge workers are pulling for jobs and are reporting back. So that's making a couple of more HTTP requests and a bit more noise on the deployment, but we don't have concrete metrics yet. But kind of we didn't dramatically scale up the workload. And Daniel already said, working on Windows. So we made it once running natively as a pip install in Windows in 2.10. But I heard from Delia that kind of at the moment in 3.1, it seems to be broken. So also that is maybe need to be fixed. And then the outlook is that maybe a small footprint native Windows deployment is possible. So if you have a Windows worker, hopefully soonish, Windows native install is possible. workaround at the moment is you need to deploy to WSL as a sidecar and then integrate with Windows. But it was in the past already working. Mainly, I would say, yeah, we also need to maybe make CI tests for that to ensure it's not breaking down when the Airflow core changes. But it gives the outlook, and yeah, it's not far away that you can run also on whatever Windows boxes you have in your network if needed. Yeah, and that's also the call for contributions. It's kind of, we did a lot, and we are happily receiving also bug fixes for this, for everybody using it.